Demons are taking over the island as Emu continues to convert one by one each of the giants trying to stand in their way from reaching Elder Jarl, so that he can use the two legendary pirate captains to upseat the current leader of Elbaf and have them rule the island as its new kings, putting the island of giants under their direct control, and once they do, they'll have an army of demonic giants ready to help them win the coming war. But first, a quick check-in with the cover story, because it looks like Oda's not done just yet telling Yamato's journey through Wano. This time we get to see her participating in a sumo match. We even see Kawamatsu in the crowd cheering her on. And now that we know that this isn't actually over, if I could just make one tiny request, it would be that the final conflict we get in this cover story be Jack resurfacing somewhere in Wano, going on a rampage in his Zoan form, and then Yamato stepping in to stop him. It's a theory I've had for this cover story for a couple of months now, and I feel like if we're really supposed to be watching her emulate Oda's pilgrimage through the country, then at some point she has to repeat this, because this was one of his biggest feats. Other than that though, I'm not exactly sure what else Oda has in store for us with this cover story, but it is kind of nice knowing that it's going to continue on for a bit longer, because like I mentioned in my last review, had it ended with the last chapter, it kind of would feel like it wasn't worth the time investment. But getting back to the chapter, this was basically the definition of a setup chapter, so there's not really too much to go over, but we do have a pretty interesting update on the whole demonic giant situation as things are continuing to get worse by the minute. Because as they continue to march forward on their way to put an end to Elder Jarl, they are slowly converting more and more giants. And the very first giant we see in this chapter is Kashi, which immediately sets into fear that we're going to lose yet another one of the very few named giants that we know of, as he tries his best to reason with his captains to spare Elder Jarl, as he is a legendary warrior that they all grew up idolizing. But it all ends up falling on deaf ears. I mean, they heard him, they just, didn't care. Because as far as these two are concerned, he's a relic of the past, and that the new Age of Giants would have no use for idols or gods once they are kings, and it would be an age based solely on strength. Well, that and being demons, because there's no way that transforming each and every giant on the island isn't part of the overall plan. Now, lucky for Kashi though, he gets saved from being the very first victim in the chapter, as he's pulled back by Tall Man, a member of the Giant Warrior Pirates, a member that, as far as I can remember, we never knew the name of prior to this chapter. And technically, we may still not know, considering this video was based off the fan translation of the chapter, and as reliable as they are for most things, their translations do have a tendency to somehow completely miss with the names of characters. So we won't really know what this previously no-name giant's actual name is until we get the official translation, which unfortunately for him is too long to wait, as just as quickly as he appeared in the chapter, he is immediately transformed into yet another demonic giant. And I really like the way Oda decides to depict the process of how the giants are converted in this chapter, using an Othello board as reference, with the white pieces still representing all the still normal giants in this conflict, and the black pieces representing the demonic ones. If you've never played Othello, it's pretty simple. The whole point is to fill an 8x8 board with black and white pieces. The player whose pieces cover a majority of the board is the winner, and you can capture your opponent's pieces by having yours surround theirs. Which is exactly what we see play out in this chapter, as one of the demonic giants sneak up beside Tall Man, surrounding him with Dory in a diagonal line like shown with the pieces on the board. And in the same way the white piece is flipped over to black, Tall Man is swallowed up by the magic circle that we saw Emu use on Bragi, flipped upside down, and forced to join the dark side. And funnily enough, this isn't the first time Oda's used this game to represent what was currently going on in a conflict. We saw it being used by the CP0 agents in Wano back during the raid on Onigashima, though in that case, it was simply being used to keep track of the number of forces the samurais had on their side versus Kaido and the Beast Warrior Pirates. Back during that arc, we also saw the pieces being switched from one side to another to represent members of one army switching sides, but in that instance, it was members of the enemy team switching over to the good side. A choice they made themselves versus here with the choices being forced upon them. And this is actually the first real antithesis I've seen between Emu and Luffy. Their methods of bringing others to their side are so different that it's almost night and day. Emu takes others and turns them against their will, forcing them to join their side, dominating them, and taking away their freedom for absolute servitude. Well, Luffy is just so naturally alluring that even his enemies eventually end up wanting to help him. Again, it's choice versus domination, freedom versus servitude. This chapter really hits home that that's going to be the main conflict between these two when they eventually clash, with Emu fighting to bring the entire world under their direct control, and Luffy fighting for everyone's freedom. And after this arc, Luffy is definitely going to be motivated to fight them once he sees what Emu's done to the giants, with more and more of them being turned into demons. Though luckily enough, Ripley avoids being made into one as she rushes by the others trying to make her way over to the kids. She does end up hearing about Scopper being taken down, but we don't really get too much of a reaction from her on it since she is so focused on saving their son. And this quick scene of her actually made me realize that we really haven't gotten much time to see these two together as husband and wife outside of all this chaos, let alone all three of them as a family. So I'm actually kind of looking forward to, once all this is over, seeing Ripley and Colin's reaction to seeing Scopper survived, and getting to see the three of them as a family reunited. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm kind of more looking forward to that than I am seeing the actual Straw Hat crew finally reunited by the end of this arc. Moving along though, what surprised me the most out of the big reveals in this chapter was the design Oda went with for Killing Cam's hybrid form, more so the human half than the dragon. Though I was surprised to see him take a more centaur look in his hybrid form. Honestly, I just figured he'd look a bit more like Kaido did, considering they're both dragons. But he actually much more resembles what we saw from Venus back on Egghead, which I guess kinda does make sense given the type of dragon he is, seeing as Quillins have more horse-like bodies over what you'd normally imagine a dragon to look like. But getting back to his human half, I did not expect Killing Cam to look that good. It's weird because normally when we see celestial dragons, or at least the men, they look like ogres who took a metal bat to the face repeatedly. But with the Holy Knights, so far, Oda has made sure to draw all of them anywhere between normal-looking humans to downright attractive. Personally, I think what's really adding to his look is that in his human form, he looks a lot more energetic. Because when we saw him in, I guess, his full Zoan form, which surprised me, I thought that actually was his hybrid form, but he always seemed to be a lot more mellow, almost like he was half asleep when he was in that form. Which, now that I think about it, could just be a side effect of his devil fruit. As we see when he enters his hybrid form, he needs to use a horn to control the nightmares, which I don't remember seeing him use when he was in his full Zoan form. So it could be that when he's in his full Zoan form, he has direct control over the nightmares without the horn, but a trade-off is that he has to be in a constant state of drowsiness. Either way, he looks much more animated now, which is a good thing because with Emu in control of Gunko, and Summers already having been embarrassed by Scopper, he has essentially become the main threat amongst the Holy Knights. I mean, Emu is hands down the big bad here, but Emu is also not someone we're really supposed to take down just yet, and most will see them driven from Gunko's body or leave of their own choice due to something more urgent that requires their attention. Which, once they do, Gunko is likely to resume where she left off with trying to reconnect with Brook. And like I already mentioned, Summers being so easily handled by Scopper took a lot of points away from him in the threatening category, so no matter what happens, I can't see him resuming his role as being the primary antagonist of this arc. So Killing Cam by default is going to be elevated to that role, which means he needs to present himself as one. His sharp teeth are definitely helping with that, which, by the way, I've seen some taking those as confirmation that he might be at the very least part fishman, since we normally only see those type of teeth on people of that race. And if that was the case, it would help to explain why he wears the mask in his full Zoan form, but he doesn't need it in his human form, assuming his bubble is filled with water, and in his dragon form, he doesn't have gills, so he wouldn't be able to breathe without it. But I'm honestly not sure if I buy into that just yet. I don't know, it just seems a little weird that after everything Oda showed us back in the Fishman Island arc, the hatred and racism perpetrated onto the fishmen by the world nobles, and even the treatment Shirahoshi and her family faced during the reverie that almost led to an all-out conflict between the two groups, that he'd revealed this entire time there's been a family of fishmen living in the Holy Land for centuries. I don't know, we'll just have to wait and see what Oda actually plans to do with this. But one thing we won't have to wait for is to see the dream holes and how they function, as we get to see one spawning a little devil-like creature in this chapter. It actually kind of reminds me of the devils we get from Black Clover when they're in their chibi forms, except more cartoonish than adorable. And the reason for these devils spawning is actually due to the kids, who, despite being knocked out by Imu's haki in the last chapter, are subconsciously still aware enough to hear the words being said around them. So when they heard the word demon being yelled out by the other giants, they naturally began dreaming about what they thought demons would look like, and there you go. On top of that, Killing Cam has revived the nightmares that were already taken down by the giants beforehand, so now Emu has an army of demons, demon giants, and the nightmares storming across Elbaf, with Elder Jarl set as their destination, and no one currently in the Sun Realm stands a chance of stopping this hellish parade. But lucky for us, things are about to get a lot better before they can get any worse, as we cut back in time a bit and see what happens with Chopper and Scopper Caban after they fell off the branch. Well, Scopper fell, Chopper more so jumped off after him, but still. Turns out, Chopper was able to keep them both from dying from the fall by using his guard point, which I really did not think would actually work. Honestly, I thought we'd have to have Luffy step in to save them, like he did with the new giant warrior pirates a couple chapters ago, but you know, in a much safer manner. Speaking of, Luffy immediately clocks a Chopper and someone else had fallen down to the underworld the moment they land, But what's curious is that he is the only one able to specifically call out that Chopper. Everyone else, probably through observation haki, is able to tell that someone had fallen nearby, but the fact that Luffy was able to tell exactly who it was is a mystery, even to himself. This being a case of him subconsciously using the voice of all things could be the reason. It also explains why Loki is able to tell exactly where they fell, while the others just know the general direction, seeing as he likely also has the ability. Or this could just be Oda subtly showing that Luffy's observation haki had grown well above even what he was aware of. Which would make sense in Loki's case as well, seeing as everything we've seen from him so far and the fact that his eyes have been covered this entire time implies that he is also a master of it. Anyway, now that Chopper and Scopper have made it to the underworld, they can let the group here finally know what's been happening up in the Sun Realm, but not before we get a call from Loki's mysterious friend Moza, who basically tells them that due to the trouble they mentioned in their last conversation, this will likely be the last time the two ever get to talk, and to thank him for all the conversations they had before. Which obviously upsets Loki, not because he's losing the only person he's able to actually communicate with while being imprisoned in the underworld, but because he is genuinely worried about Moza's safety. And it's worth pointing out that we still have no idea exactly who Moza is. Many believe that it might be Garl trying to ease his guilt of letting Loki take all the blame for what happened to King Harold by giving him a friend to keep him company, but personally, I don't think that's the case. I don't know, I just get the feeling that whoever Moza is someone on the much younger side. But regardless of their real identity, I do like this interaction we get between them and Loki, because it gives us a chance to take a glimpse past the cocky persona that he puts on, and lets us see the real him for just a moment. And it's not just us readers, both Goldberg and Gerd also get to listen in on this conversation, so they also get to see a side of Loki that is actually caring and compassionate. And you just know that the reason Oda had the two of them be the only ones to see this is so that later in this arc, when we get the inevitable clash between the two giant brothers, they can help persuade their captain on Loki's behalf. Of course, that's assuming they all survive the coming conflict, because just as they get filled in on what's been happening in the Sun Realm, and we get Scopper claiming that he was in fact the number 2 strongest on his crew, that's when they all feel Imu's incredibly strong blasts of Conqueror's Haki that we saw in the beginning of the last chapter. And that alone was enough to make even Luffy take this seriously, as his carefree attitude has completely disappeared, and they all get ready to head back up and face this threat. And what I like about us waiting until things got this bad before getting these guys involved is that it actually gives us a justifiable reason for freeing Loki. I have not been quiet about not being a fan of Luffy's selfish desire to free Loki earlier in this arc on the off chance that he might know where Shanks went, but now we're in a situation where we need all the strength on our side that we can get, especially with both Dory and Bragi have been turned into demons, and even when injured, Loki is still a major powerhouse. So we have no choice but to bring him into this conflict and just hope that he doesn't end up making things much worse. I'm not exactly sure how many more chapters we'll have to wait until we see this group officially enter the battle, because the ending of this chapter puts us timeline-wise right before the midpoint of the last one. But once they do, we'll be in for a bunch of epic fights, the new giant warrior pirates versus the old, Sanji and Zoro versus the 2 holy knights, and of course, our 2 sun gods versus the devil.